I'm joined today by Chauncey DeVega, who's a contributing writer for Salon and Alternet. His essays on race, politics, and popular culture can be found at chaunceydevega.com. He's also on Twitter and Facebook. Chauncey, it's great to have you on. You've been exploring this question in detail of whether these ideas that we're hearing from Donald Trump, the racist and xenophobic ideas, if these are sort of outliers that don't really fit within what the Republican electorate likes or believes, or whether Donald Trump is actually channeling the racism and xenophobia that may already exist within the electorate. So let's go back to the beginning. Talk to us about how you first started exploring, in fact, with an article called, or an article exploring whether Donald Trump rallies are so-called safe spaces for racism. How did you first come across this issue?
Well, I've been writing about Donald Trump for some time. Actually, my first foray at the Donald was really looking at his style of rhetoric and performance. And I wrote a piece of Salon on my own site, chaunceydevega.com, basically saying that he's a professional wrestling character. If you think about his rhetoric, his language, he did time actually supporting the World Wrestling Federation. I'm a huge, huge professional wrestling fan, have watched my whole life. And I said, my goodness, he's really a performance artist. But then it became abundantly clear that he's not just a reality TV show carnival barker, which he is, but he really is a proto-fascist in a lot of ways. And for me, the moment that really crystallized it, never mind his statements about Muslims, his statements about Hispanics and Latinos being rapists who carry razors who want to rape white women, that's right out of 19th century know-nothing rhetoric right there. That's the yellow journalism of the 19th and early 20th centuries. But when he had that rally where his supporters assaulted a Black Lives Matter supporter,
right,
and they were yelling all lives matter, which is really a de facto way of saying white power. All lives matter is the new white power for all intents and purposes. It really became clear that Trump's rallies are safe spaces for racism and for xenophobia. And if you look at the public opinion data, if you look at all the research that's been done about racial attitudes, the Southern strategy, for years, actually, I've been saying that conservatism and racism are one and the same thing. That's right out of the political science literature on the subject. So Donald Trump is really just the base of the Republican Party, unrestrained. He's their id, basically telling us who they have always been and will continue to be in this age of changing demographics.
And I want to dig in specifically to some of the specific issues that are sort of being alluded to by Trump's ideas. But to go back to the first issue you talked about, which is sort of Trump's demeanor and his presence, for all the disagreements I obviously have with the man about the policy ideas he's presented, and obviously I think he's completely unqualified to be leading this country, of course, he is very, very good at taking what are fundamentally outrageous ideas and presenting them in a way where they sound sort of logical and inoffensive, right? Listen, I have plenty of Muslim friends, blah, blah, blah. We just got to get this thing figured out, right? We need to figure out what's going on, was the phrase he kept repeating, and that was in his statement on this new idea to ban Muslim travel to the United States. Even in his criticisms, for example, referring to Jeb Bush as a low-energy guy, it's actually a really interesting way in which Donald Trump has taken both criticisms and policy ideas that make no sense, and he presents them in a way that I understand why they are actually resonating with people, even though I recognize I don't agree with any of them.
Well, absolutely. You know, he's emotional. His body language, as I said, he's a student of professional wrestling. And actually some sociolinguists, the New York Times had a cover story on this. They analyzed, I think they did about 25,000 or 50,000 words from his speeches and presentations. And they said he's a classic authoritarian fascist demagogue. What he does is he talks in simple terms of us and them, terms about safety and protection. He's really, really smart in terms of reaching out to people's insecurities and making them feel safe. And because he's so vague in his language, that allows the listener and the viewer to fill in all those gaps with their dreams, their hopes, and really their anxieties. And I was on the RT yesterday, and I'm going to double down on this. My real concern is what happens when Donald Trump supporters, because we know the number one threat to the U.S. security right now is right-wing domestic terrorism. What happens when those angry, disaffected people who have been mobilized? We know that white supremacists are recruiting. They have been recruiting at Tea Party rallies. They certainly have infiltrated these groups. White supremacists are endorsing Donald Trump. Where are all these angry, disaffected, really, really belligerent voters going to go? That's what's scaring the hell out of me.
Well, so far, I mean, when we talk about positive comments from the white supremacist KKK types in this election about candidates, we're only hearing them talk about Donald Trump. In other words, they're either not a factor, we're just not hearing white supremacists say anything positive or negative about Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or whoever, Jeb Bush, etc. It's just shows of support for the ideas presented by Donald Trump. And I'd be curious to know from you, Chauncey, who's been following and writing about Trump for a while now, do you think Trump even personally believes the stuff that he's been presenting on the campaign? Arguably, it doesn't even matter. If it's part of what he says is his campaign platform, it is. But when he says, for example, that he's personally very much against abortion, do we actually have any reason to think that that's true, or that that's just a political posturing move?
I mean, as you said, if he means it, it's sort of irrelevant at this point, right?
Yeah.
Because words are actions. I don't know. His father was reportedly in the KKK. One of his ex-wives said the man keeps a copy of Mein Kampf near the bed.
Right.
But I wasn't there, and I don't know. But I will say this, though. I think that he believes it to the degree that he knows it's a viable political strategy. And again, I've gone to white supremacist websites for years. And years ago, years in the sense of 5 or 6 years ago, they had a series of posts. I want to identify the website that basically outlined how a white conservative politician could use white racial animus in a time of changing demographics to win the White House. Basically, you shrink the electorate, which the Republican Party is doing. You go to the courts. You kill the federal government, as Grover Norquist said. You make it so weak you can drown it in the bathtub. You activate white racial resentment and white identity politics, and you put a polite face on it. And Donald Trump is taking that and combining it with what's something, it's a concept called right-wing producerism. Very old concept in terms of right-wing populism. And he knows that this is a way that he can get into the primary, certainly, and maybe have a brokered convention. He won't win, but again, his voters don't know that. These are very, very disillusioned, low-information voters who are going to be angry as hell.
Yeah, that's an understatement if I've ever heard one. And we're actually going to be addressing this issue of populism is not just left-wing. We're going to talk with an expert on this from the New School Economics Department about left-wing versus right-wing populism in a couple of weeks. I think it'll be interesting. With regard to the Trump rallies, okay, when we see the video you talked about, for example, the Black Lives Matter protester being beaten and then dragged out, and the video is just insane. We played it. A number of other examples of the white power screams and shouts at Trump rallies, etc. Do you think that Trump is in any way growing this sort of white nationalist movement, or is he simply attracting the elements of the right that were already part of that movement and sort of coalescing them?
I think he's making it more polite. I think he's making it more respectable. And we really live in a complex and vexing moment. So you have a president who happens to be black. Obama's not the country's first black president. He's a president who happens to be black. He's really a neoliberal Rockefeller Republican, but the white right hates him. With a level of animus and rage that can only be traced to racial resentment and overt racism. Again, we have a lot of public opinion research and social psychology research on that question.
Yeah.
But I think that we overestimated the levels of tolerance, of inclusion, and the decline of overt white racism in this country. So racism moved from the front stage to the backstage. And that's really one of the accomplishments of the civil rights movement. And racial attitudes have changed. But I think Donald Trump and the Republican Party, again, because the Republican Party is built on the Southern strategy. Its electorate is almost 100% white. It uses the politics of white racial resentment. And Donald Trump is sort of turning over the apple cart, so to speak, because he's showing the public what the magic trick is. And he's saying, I'm not going to play along anymore. I'm going to mobilize the base I know we already have, and I'm going to give these angry, white, racially resentful voters who are scared of economic change, as we all are, scared of demographic change, and feel that they're obsolete in a changing America, I'm going to give them a voice. They're not going to win, but they're still going to cause chaos.
Last thing I want to get your thoughts on is New USA Today poll, Suffolk University poll says that 68% of Trump supporters claim they would vote for him if he did not run as a Republican and ran instead as an independent. Do you see any connection between that high level of willingness to support Trump above the Republican Party to the fact that he is coalescing this xenophobic white nationalist movement? Is there any conclusion we can draw from that?
I think as I said, we're heading to a brokered convention likely. He's a George Wallace type. I'm not so sure his voters will actually turn out and participate. When you have these third-party candidates, especially a French candidate like Trump, they're going to tell the pollsters, yeah, I'm going to vote. But when you drill down into the data, very often they don't participate. And again, as I said, the quote-unquote respectable wing, the adults in the room in the Republican Party, they're scared. But again, they created this monster with Fox News and the right-wing echo chamber. So the establishment Republicans are running away from this guy. But here's the dilemma. You've seen this with Cruz, with Rubio, with Bush. They're going to have to chase him. And they're going to have to go out there and use this racially resentful, overt bigotry. I think it was Cruz who said last week that a majority of violent criminals are Democrats.
Right.
If I haven't heard a racial appeal, I don't know if it's stupefying. So they're going to have to chase him. And that's going to be the puzzle. How far will they chase him in order to win over his base? Or are they just hoping that those voters will then convert back to the candidate who's nominated for the party, which they likely will not?
Chauncey DeVega, he hosts a weekly podcast, The Chauncey DeVega Show, and you can also read more of his writing at chaunceyDeVega.com. Great to have you on today. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.